You ever have one of those weeks where the universe seems determined to test your patience? Mine started with a broken shutter and ended in a war I never saw coming. I wasn't looking for a fight. I just wanted to fix my store, mind my business, and maybe sell a few vintage clocks to the tourists who wander in on Saturdays. But the people sitting in the big old building across the street, oh, they had other ideas. My antique shop sits on the corner of Market and Pine, a cozy little spot that smells like old books, lemon oil, and sometimes, if you catch it just right, cinnamon from the bakery next door. It's the kind of place people describe as charming or quaint right before they try to buy a pocket watch for half its value. Still, I love it. I've run it for 11 years. I know every creaky floorboard and chipped bit of molding in that place. So when a freak windstorm came barreling through on a Wednesday night and yanked the shutter off my second-floor window, I didn't panic. One loose shutter doesn't bring down a business. I saw it the next morning, dangling there like a broken arm. I sighed, shook my head, and thought, well, that's Saturday's project. I had the tools. I had the paint. I even had the replacement hinges from the last time this happened. Just a matter of finding a couple hours. But before Saturday came, I got a letter. Not a casual, hey neighbor, fix your shutter, kind of note. No, this thing had a city seal, a case number, and legal language that made my head spin. It was from the Historic Preservation Board. Apparently, my building was on some secondary registry of visual heritage list, and my broken shutter was now a threat to the aesthetic character of the street. Their words, not mine. And just like that, they hit me with a $50 day fine. Not a warning. Not a grace period. Just an immediate penalty. At first, I laughed. I really did. Thought it was some sort of prank or computer error. I mean, there were pigeons living inside the old building across the street, and somehow my shutter was the issue? Come on. But when I called the number on the letter, a very real woman named Janet answered. She spoke like she'd been breathing city code violations since birth. I explained the situation, said I was planning to fix the shutter that weekend. Well, sir, she interrupted, unfortunately the fine is already active. The visual offense was reported and logged. You'll need to address the issue and then request an appeal in writing. I paused. You're telling me that even though I'm actively fixing it, I'm still getting fined? That's correct. But, it's been broken for 1 day. Then it's $50. I hung up. I'm a patient man. I've dealt with weird customers, theft, even a pipe burst in the middle of winter. But something about that call hit a nerve. Maybe it was the tone. Maybe it was the smug bureaucracy in her voice. Or maybe it was what happened next. The next day, I got a visit from Diane Holbrook. I'd seen her around. Tall, white blazer, clipboard always in hand. She was the chair of the board and treated the title like she was some kind of local monarch. She walked right into my shop like she owned the place, barely glanced at the shelves of antiques, and said, just here to photograph the shutter for documentation. No greeting. No apology. Just that clipped, cold tone. I stood there, trying not to lose it. You know I'm fixing it this weekend, right? She looked at me over her glasses. You're welcome to file a Form 114-B to contest the fine, but the clock started yesterday. She walked back out, snapped a few photos, and got into her car like she'd just swatted a fly. Now I was pissed. The next few hours, I tried to calm myself. I pulled out the ladder, replaced the shutter, even repainted the whole window frame just to make it look nicer. But the more I worked, the more it gnawed at me. The part that really got under my skin wasn't the $50. It wasn't even the fine. It was the principle. They didn't treat me like a neighbor. They didn't ask, or check in, or give a damn what was going on. They just saw something they didn't like and moved in like vultures. And the worst part? Diane and her little board operated out of that decrepit, 3-story brick building right across the street. The thing hadn't been renovated since the 1970s. I could see peeling paint, cracked windows, even vines climbing up one side like the building was slowly being reclaimed by nature. Yet here they were, judging me over one shutter. I did some digging that night. A little Google sleuthing. Turns out the Historic Preservation Board wasn't some major government branch. It was a city-funded committee with volunteer members, most of whom had personal businesses nearby. Diane owned a staging company. Walter, another board member, ran a real estate agency. Pete, the third member, had some interest in art galleries. That's when I realized, this wasn't about shutters or aesthetics. It was about control. They used the board to push people around, to enforce their own version of beauty, and maybe even to keep certain buildings from competing with their own interests. I sat there at my desk, staring out the window at that crumbling red brick eyesore of theirs, and something clicked in my brain. They thought I was just some antique shop guy. Some small business nobody they could slap around with code violations. They had no idea what I was really capable of. Not yet. But they would. The thing about people who think they hold all the power is, they never expect pushback. They get so used to people nodding, apologizing, paying the fine, filling out the forms, that when someone stands their ground, it short-circuits their whole system. That's exactly what I planned to do, stand my ground, but not in the way they expected. I didn't rant on Facebook. I didn't storm any council meetings or write angry letters. I did what I do best, I paid attention. I listened. I asked questions where nobody else bothered to. And I started turning over rocks. The first thing I looked into was the ownership of that decrepit building the board operated out of. It sat right across from my shop like some kind of moss-covered monument to outdated authority. People passed it every day, but no one really looked at it anymore, except me. It had these faded, green-tinted windows on the second floor and a leaky gutter that dumped water straight onto the sidewalk whenever it rained. It was barely holding together. I went to the county clerk's office on a quiet Wednesday afternoon and started pulling property records. It took about 15 minutes before I found what I was looking for. That building, 221 Market Street, wasn't actually owned by any of the board members. It was still in the name of a defunct trust that had gone inactive nearly 7 years ago. The last listed contact was a law firm that no longer existed. That meant no one had properly maintained the ownership, which also meant, legally, it was a sitting duck. Even better, it was in tax default. For years' worth of unpaid property taxes. Thousands of dollars owed. And the city, like it often does with deadbeat properties, had moved the building onto a silent tax lien auction list. Now, most people don't know this, but cities sometimes hold these auctions quietly. No big public announcement. No flashing signs. Just a short list of properties, posted deep in some back corner of a municipal website, and a single date when you can show up with a certified check and walk away with a deed. It's how developers snag abandoned homes for pennies. And this particular auction was scheduled for 2 months from the day I found that record. That was my window. I didn't tell a soul. Not even my brother, who usually gets wind of everything I do. I kept my head down, smiled at Diane and her little preservation crew whenever they walked by my store, and started preparing. I talked to a real estate lawyer, made sure I understood the process, got the necessary approvals lined up. I made visits to City Hall, played the curious businessman interested in expanding. Everyone there was more than happy to help, nobody liked the board. They just hadn't found a way to deal with them yet. I had a few sleepless nights wondering if someone else might show up to the auction. But truthfully, most people didn't even know the building was for sale, let alone abandoned. The way it still had people working inside, namely Diane and her board, gave the illusion that it was owned, functional, and safe. But on paper, it was a liability just waiting to change hands. Auction day finally came. I wore jeans and a plain polo, looking like a guy who might want to flip a duplex. There were maybe 9 other people there. Most were looking at residential stuff, run-down rentals and vacant land. When they got to 221 Market, the auctioneer read off the tax default info, the back payments due, and the starting bid. Nobody raised their paddle. Nobody except me. I walked out of that courthouse an hour later with a signed deed, the building's tax burden cleared, and full legal ownership of the place where the Historic Preservation Board held court. I didn't yell. I didn't jump around or gloat. I just smiled. Because now I held the high ground, and I was going to enjoy every second of what came next. The following day, I walked across the street and into the board's office. They had no idea yet. I could see Diane at her desk, typing something into her laptop, probably another fine for someone who left their porch light on past 10 p.m. Walter was standing over by the filing cabinet, and Pete was nursing a coffee and scrolling on his phone. "Morning," I said. They all looked up, confused. "Just wanted to stop by real quick," I said, pulling the folded papers from my jacket. "This is the new deed to this building. I bought it yesterday at the city auction. Which makes me your new landlord." The silence in that room was perfect. Diane's mouth tightened like she was sucking on a lemon. Walter blinked a few times, and Pete just froze, holding his coffee mid-air. "Effective immediately," I continued, "your month-to-month lease, if you even had one, is terminated. As of Monday, demolition begins." "You can't be serious," Diane said, voice low and sharp. "Oh, I'm very serious," I said, handing her a copy of the permit request. "See, this building hasn't passed code in years. It's filled with asbestos, the foundation is cracked, and it's become a health hazard. You'd know that if you actually followed the codes you enforce." She snatched the paper and read it over with trembling hands. "This is a protected building." I corrected her. "That protection lapsed after 5 years of non-compliance. The city never renewed it. And now, it's coming down." Walter tried to speak up, stumbling over something about legal recourse. I cut him off politely but firmly. "You're welcome to take it to court," I said. "But the law's on my side. And honestly, you should be grateful. I'm saving this city from a collapsing death trap." I turned and walked out before they could sputter any more protests. By the time Monday rolled around, the first construction crew was parked outside, orange cones lining the street, and a backhoe warming up in the early morning light. I stood beside it with a coffee in my hand, watching Diane arrive and nearly trip over herself trying to get to the front door. It was padlocked, of course. She stormed over to me. "You think this is funny?" "No," I said, taking a sip. "I think it's justice." By Monday morning, the whole town was buzzing. There's something about the sound of a demolition crew setting up shop on Main Street that gets people's attention. It was barely 7 a.m. when the first orange cones went up, and the low rumble of diesel engines echoed down the block. A bright yellow excavator stood like a mechanical beast at the curb, hydraulic arms twitching, bucket glinting in the rising sun. Workers unrolled caution tape, moved old trash bins, and unloaded plywood sheets to block off sidewalks. You could feel the tension in the air like a storm was coming, not one of wind and rain, but something far messier, a public reckoning. I stood on the sidewalk across from my shop, coffee in hand, watching the spectacle unfold. This time, I didn't hide my grin. People stopped walking to ask what was going on. I gave the same answer every time, calmly and with no small amount of satisfaction. "Just clearing out some rot," I'd say. Within the hour, Diane showed up. She came striding down the sidewalk like she was still in charge of something, arms swinging, heels clicking like gunfire on the concrete. She marched straight up to the foreman, demanding he halt operations immediately. I watched from a few feet away as she flashed papers in his face, likely old documents declaring the building historically protected. But the foreman just pointed at me. "You'll want to take that up with the owner," he said. She turned and saw me standing there, smiling, sipping from my cup like this was a Sunday picnic. "You're not going to get away with this," she hissed, walking over. "Already am," I said calmly. "Your office was given notice. You had until Friday to vacate. And you did. Or else you'd be in there right now. This building is on the city's historic register. You can't demolish it without council approval." I nodded slowly. It was on the register. But after 5 years of code violations and unpaid taxes, your protection expired. I made sure of it before I bought the place. Got a signed permit from the city. Everyone's on board. Even the fire marshal thanked me for clearing a public hazard. Diane's face went pale, then flushed red. You could almost hear the circuits overloading in her head. For so long, she had been the one issuing orders, waving clipboards, and slapping fines on anyone who stepped out of line. Now the clipboard had turned into a demolition order, and the line had been bulldozed. Still, she wasn't done. By noon, a temporary injunction had been filed with the county court. Walter had somehow wrangled a lawyer who rushed to argue that my demolition threatened a culturally significant structure, and that the board hadn't been given adequate time to contest the sale. I got the notice hand-delivered right as the crew began disassembling the roof. They paused work for exactly 45 minutes. In that time, my attorney, who I'd hired 3 weeks earlier, walked into the courtroom with every document we'd collected, photographs of the crumbling facade, engineer reports on the structural instability, asbestos inspection results, and a nice fat envelope of code violations going back a decade. The judge took one look at the evidence and dismissed the injunction. She even commented, on the record, that the building was a public health risk and that its demolition was long overdue. Game, set, match. By the end of the day, the upper floor was completely gone. Wooden beams, cracked plaster, and rusted pipes lay in a heap, waiting to be hauled away. And all the while, Diane stood across the street watching it fall apart, her hands balled into fists at her sides. That night, I went home and cracked open a cold one. I didn't feel smug. I felt right. Like something long overdue had finally been set in motion. I wasn't just tearing down a building. I was dismantling a system that had grown too arrogant to notice its own rot. The next few days were a blur. Crowds kept gathering. People asked questions. A few business owners came by to shake my hand. One guy even bought 3 vintage radios from my shop just to show support. This place needed a shake-up, he said, rapping his knuckles on my counter. Glad someone finally had the guts to do it. Even Pete came by. He shuffled into my store around day 4 of the teardown, looking sheepish and tired. He picked up an old globe, spun it slowly, then finally looked up at me. "I never liked how Diane ran the board," he said. "Felt like we were just looking for reasons to punish people. Not protect anything." I nodded. "Then why go along with it?" He sighed. "I guess I didn't want to rock the boat." I raised an eyebrow. "Sometimes the boat needs to be rocked." He nodded, put the globe down, and walked out without buying anything. But I didn't mind. At least he'd said it. That was something. The demolition wrapped by Friday. All that remained was a flat, open space filled with leveled gravel and construction fencing. The board's office was gone. So was their power. The city quietly removed their access to resources. Without an official meeting space and facing growing pressure from the business community, the Historic Preservation Board quietly disbanded. No announcement. No goodbye letter. Just silence. And for the first time in years, the street felt alive again. No one was peeking over shoulders, filing anonymous complaints, or walking on eggshells to avoid a fine for chipped paint. There was breathing room. One afternoon, I sat in the now sunny front window of my shop and watched a kid ride his bike across the empty lot where the board building once stood. He popped a wheelie and laughed as he skidded through the dirt. And I smiled. Because I didn't just win a petty argument. I broke something bigger. Something that needed to be broken. Summer crept in slowly that year, the way it does in our town, with cool mornings, dusty sunbeams through the trees, and the smell of lawn clippings in the air. But this time, it came with something else, a strange sense of peace. Market Street had always had a kind of charm, but now it felt freer. Something had shifted, something real. The weight of that decaying old building, both literal and symbolic, was gone, and people noticed. With the lot cleared, the possibilities were endless. The demolition crew left behind a perfectly leveled patch of earth, prime property right in the heart of town. Some people assumed I'd build a parking lot or sell the land to developers for a quick profit. Others thought I might expand my shop. But none of them knew what I had in mind. The truth was, I didn't want to build just anything. That space had become something more than an empty lot. It was a statement. Proof that someone could stand up to the self-appointed kings and queens of local power and win. It deserved better than just concrete and commerce. So, I started planning quietly. Every morning before opening my shop, I'd walk across the street and stand on that bare patch of earth. I'd imagine what it could be. A place for people. A place with no clipboards, no petty rules, no artificial authority. Just laughter, sunlight, and community. I called a few friends, an architect I knew from college, a local landscaper who owed me a favor, even the owner of the nursery out by Route 9. I pitched them an idea that felt a little crazy at first, a public garden and gathering space. Not a park in the formal sense, but something warmer. Intimate. Local. A tribute to everything the board tried to suppress. Word started to spread. Slowly at first. Then faster. By July, I had volunteers showing up every weekend. Teenagers planting shrubs, retired teachers painting wooden benches, small business owners donating tools and supplies. Someone even brought in a used pergola they'd salvaged from a torn-down farmhouse. We set it up right in the center of the lot. Covered it with flowering vines. Hung old lanterns from its beams. It became the heart of the space. We named it the Common Ground. It wasn't official, no permits, no sign-offs, no budget. Just people coming together. The town loved it. The first event we held there was a weekend market. I cleared it with the city, got the proper permits this time, and 20 small vendors set up stalls. Homemade bread, local honey, used books, jewelry, pottery. I even rolled out a few antique clocks onto a makeshift table under the pergola. People strolled through all afternoon, sipping lemonade, kids running in circles around flower beds. A man played acoustic guitar near the back gate while an older couple slow danced on the gravel. That was the moment I knew we'd done something right. Meanwhile, Diane disappeared from public life. After the board disbanded, she closed her home staging business, for personal reasons, according to the notice taped to the front door. Word around town was she'd moved to her sister's place in upstate Vermont, citing health issues and stress from community politics. No one saw her at council meetings anymore. No one missed the citations, either. But I wasn't bitter. At least, not anymore. Truth is, I even mailed her a photo once. A wide-angle shot of the Common Ground in full bloom, people smiling, a kid flying a kite in the background. On the back, I wrote 4 words in block letters, "This is what we built." I never heard back. The town began to change in small ways. Less fear. More conversation. Neighbors started talking instead of tattling. The city began re-evaluating how it enforced certain codes, more warnings, fewer automatic fines. And more importantly, they launched a review board made up of rotating community members, not self-appointed authorities. Real transparency. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And as for me? I kept running my little antique shop. Sales even went up. Tourists started including the garden on their must-see lists. Instagram photos of the pergola at sunset became a minor sensation in the area. One local influencer even called it the soul of Market Street. One day, near the end of summer, a kid walked into my store. Couldn't have been more than 12. Messy hair, backpack slung low, holding a notebook. He looked around, wide-eyed at all the ticking clocks and strange brass gadgets. "You own the garden, right?" he asked. I smiled. "Sort of. I guess you could say I started it. But it belongs to everyone now." He nodded like that made sense. "I wrote about it for school. My teacher said it's what real leadership looks like." I didn't know what to say to that. So I just thanked him and let him pick out a compass from the display case for free. That night, I locked up the shop and walked across the street. The garden was quiet. A soft breeze stirred the wind chimes hanging under the pergola. The lanterns glowed gently in the dusk. Someone had left a painted rock near the fountain. It read, "Stand your ground, build new ones." I sat on one of the benches and took a deep breath. Not of victory, but of peace. The shutter incident had started as a nuisance. A petty fine. A stupid misunderstanding. But it became the spark for something bigger. Something necessary. That's the funny thing about lines in the sand, they're not always about the fight. Sometimes, they're about where you choose to begin. They tried to fine me for a broken shutter. So I bought their building, and planted a future in its place.